Clara had been looking forward to tonight for days, a dinner with close friends that was meant to be light, cheerful, and filled with laughter, yet as soon as she walked into the softly lit restaurant, a strange tension gripped her chest. James, her boyfriend of 3 years, greeted her with a distracted smile, checking his phone even as he held the door open, and for a brief second, Clara felt that familiar flicker of frustration that she had been trying to ignore for months, a tiny seed of unease planted by small dismissals, subtle dismissive gestures, and moments where she felt invisible despite being with someone she loved. Their friends, a lively group of people who had known them both since college, were already gathered at the long table, animated voices overlapping in excitement, stories flying from one side to the other, and Clara forced herself to smile, to laugh at the right moments, to tuck away the irritation that had been quietly growing inside her. She had planned to enjoy herself, to let the evening pass without incident, but as soon as the conversation turned toward work, James's usual habit of brushing off her concerns emerged once more. He cracked a joke about her long day, trying to lighten the mood, but Clara felt a pang of disappointment, a mix of hurt and anger rising in her throat because she had confided in him about a challenging project, a demanding client, and long hours spent trying to prove herself, and instead of empathy, she had received a dismissive comment, an offhand joke, and a casual shrug that made her feel small in front of their friends. Her hands fidgeted with her napkin, her smile tightening, and she could feel her pulse quicken as embarrassment mingled with frustration, the warmth she had carried into the room quickly cooling into a knot of anxiety. The conversation continued around her, friends laughing about mundane stories and shared memories, oblivious to the silent storm brewing at Clara's side, and for a few moments, she debated whether to let it go, to smile politely and pretend everything was fine, but the words she had held back for months, the feelings she had tried to express gently but failed to convey in the past, surged up unexpectedly, and before she could stop herself, she leaned slightly forward and said clearly, though with a tremor of nervousness in her voice, "James, you need to be more supportive." The room froze for a heartbeat, the air shifting as every eye briefly turned toward them, and Clara instantly regretted the sharpness in her tone, the public nature of her request, realizing she had wanted intimacy and understanding but had instead created a spotlight of tension. James's face stiffened, his mouth pressing into a thin line, and Clara saw a flash of something she hadn't seen before, a mixture of hurt and embarrassment, and she immediately feared she had gone too far. He opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, but then paused, looking down at his hands, the clink of silverware and the soft hum of conversation filling the awkward silence between them. Clara's stomach twisted as she tried to gauge his reaction, hoping he would understand that she wasn't attacking him but expressing a need that had been building quietly, a desire for connection, for him to acknowledge her struggles, for him to show that he was present in the ways that mattered most, yet the weight of the moment made her feel exposed, vulnerable, and terrified that she had broken something unspoken between them. She glanced at their friends, who had momentarily stopped laughing, some exchanging uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene, and Clara felt a deep surge of shame mingled with regret, wishing she could pull the words back, rewind time, and approach the situation with gentler phrasing, with softer delivery, with a private conversation instead of an unintended public confrontation. James finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "I didn't realize you felt that way," and though his words were calm, there was an unmistakable distance now, a subtle coldness, a wall that Clara hadn't noticed before. She tried to explain herself, to say that she only wanted him to know how much she valued his presence, his support, and his attention, but the words felt heavy, clumsy, failing to capture the urgency of her feelings and the warmth behind her intentions. The rest of the dinner continued, yet a quiet tension lingered like a shadow, an invisible thread between them that neither dared to fully address, Clara forcing laughter when jokes came her way, James nodding politely but not engaging with the same spark that had always drawn her to him, their friends chatting and sharing stories, oblivious to the growing rift that Clara could feel with every glance, every pause, every careful choice of words. As the meal progressed, Clara caught herself watching James closely, noticing the slight tightening of his jaw, the way he avoided her eyes, the subtle shrug of his shoulders that betrayed a withdrawal she had never experienced before, and a sinking feeling settled in her chest, an ache that made her stomach flutter with both anxiety and anticipation of what might come next. When dessert arrived, a shared plate of chocolate and berries, Clara reached for his hand across the table, a tentative gesture of reconciliation, but he barely touched her fingers, retracting slightly, and her heart constricted with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. She had known relationships required compromise and understanding, but she had never imagined that a single moment, a single choice of words, could create such palpable tension, a silent storm that seemed to hover over them, invisible yet undeniable, and she began to question whether she had misjudged his sensitivity or underestimated her own expectations. As the evening wound down, the group decided to leave, and Clara felt the heaviness of every step, the quiet strain that had grown between her and James like a shadow following them out of the warm glow of the restaurant into the cool night air. She hoped for an opportunity to talk, to explain, to apologize, yet even as she walked beside him under the softly glowing streetlights, his distance was clear, his silence more telling than any words could be, and Clara felt a deep, aching loneliness despite the presence of someone she loved dearly. That night, after returning home, she sat on the edge of their shared bed, replaying the evening over and over, each moment magnified in her mind, each word weighed with infinite consequences, questioning why a simple plea for support had sparked such an intense reaction, wondering if their relationship had been built on fragile understanding that could be so easily shaken. She thought of their past, laughing in parks, sharing quiet evenings, whispering dreams in the dark, and the contrast with the sharp edges of this single confrontation made her chest tighten, a mix of longing, guilt, and fear gnawing at her. Clara tried texting him, small messages of reassurance, careful attempts at connection, but the replies were short, clipped, and emotionally distant, a stark departure from the warmth she had always known. Sleep eluded her as she lay in the quiet apartment, the familiar spaces now echoing with tension, her mind racing through scenarios, imagining conversations, wishing for a rewind button, and praying that somehow, someway, she could bridge the invisible gap that had formed in a single, painful evening. As she drifted into restless sleep, the last thought in her mind was a haunting worry: had she said too much, had she gone too far, or had she simply uncovered a fragility in James that neither of them had acknowledged before? And would this silent rift mark the beginning of something that neither apology nor explanation could easily repair, leaving her to wonder if love alone could withstand the consequences of words spoken in a moment of vulnerability? The morning after the dinner, Clara woke with a heaviness in her chest, the kind of weight that pressed on her chest and made every breath feel slightly harder, as if the night had stretched out the tension from the restaurant into the quiet of their apartment, and when she glanced over at James, who was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling on his phone, barely acknowledging her presence, the ache inside her deepened, the familiar warmth, the comfort of his attention, seemed gone overnight, replaced by a cold distance she had never experienced before, and Clara struggled to understand how a single sentence, a simple request for support, had created such an invisible wall between them. She tried to speak, starting with a soft good morning, but James responded only with a curt nod, his eyes still fixed on the screen, his fingers scrolling as if the world outside the digital glow was more interesting than the person sitting beside him. Clara's heart sank, and she felt a strange combination of sadness, fear, and frustration. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but every attempt felt risky, as though even the smallest gesture could push him further away. She remembered the laughter they had shared at breakfast only a week ago, the casual jokes, the teasing smiles, and the contrast to the icy silence now made her chest ache with longing. Throughout the day, she tried small gestures, a cup of coffee, a note left on the counter, a gentle touch on his shoulder, but James barely responded, moving through the apartment like a ghost, polite but distant, present but not present, and Clara's mind spun with questions, wondering what exactly she had done wrong, if it was her tone, her words, or if he had always carried some fragile pride she hadn't noticed until now. Each time she tried to approach him, James's body language signaled withdrawal, crossed arms, avoiding eye contact, quiet sighs that spoke louder than words, and Clara felt an almost physical pain at the distance, the silent coldness between them that seemed to grow with every unspoken word. She began replaying the dinner scene over and over, imagining different ways she could have phrased her plea, softer, gentler, in private, anywhere but in front of friends, and each replay filled her with both guilt and desperation, a yearning to fix something that seemed larger than a single mistake. By midday, Clara found herself wandering around the apartment, attempting to distract herself with chores, organizing books, washing dishes, anything to keep her hands busy while her mind ran wild with anxiety and longing. And she caught herself glancing at the clock every few minutes, hoping for a sign that James might break the silence, that he might reach for her hand, that he might speak with the warmth he always carried before, yet the clock's slow tick only emphasized the emptiness, the space between them that no physical presence could fill. Messages she sent went unanswered, each small ping of the phone sending a jolt of hope followed by the sting of disappointment, a roller coaster of anticipation and heartbreak that left her feeling drained, her mind oscillating between fear and hope, and she wondered if love alone could survive when communication had faltered so completely. In her heart, Clara knew that relationships required patience, understanding, and forgiveness, yet she also recognized that a single moment of perceived disrespect or embarrassment could have consequences neither of them had anticipated, and the thought gnawed at her as she watched James move through the apartment with quiet efficiency, speaking little, laughing less, and reserving the warmth for moments that did not include her. She remembered the years they had spent together, the quiet evenings on the couch, the walks in the park, the whispered confessions in the dark, and the contrast with the present made the distance between them feel almost unbearable, a void created by words spoken with too much emotion and too little foresight, and she feared that their bond, strong though it had always seemed, was fragile in ways she hadn't fully understood. By late afternoon, Clara could no longer contain the mix of longing and frustration, and she tried once more to bridge the gap, asking James softly if he wanted to go for a walk, to step outside and breathe together, to leave the apartment and its silent tension behind even for a short while, but he declined quietly, his tone polite but firm, signaling that the wall between them was still intact, and Clara felt a deep pang of helplessness, wishing she could reach him not just physically, but emotionally, to remind him of the love they shared, of the trust and care that had formed the foundation of their years together. She thought back to the dinner party, to the moment she had spoken her heart in front of friends, realizing that while she had intended to express vulnerability and need, James had perceived it as criticism, perhaps even as humiliation, and the thought made her heart tighten. She wished she could explain herself, to tell him that love sometimes required honesty, even if it was difficult, even if it caused discomfort, yet she feared that any words she spoke now might push him further into withdrawal. That evening, Clara tried to prepare a simple dinner, hoping to create a space for conversation, warmth, and connection, but James barely touched his plate, eating slowly, avoiding eye contact, and the silence between them felt deafening, a stark reminder that the chasm created by a few words could feel insurmountable when emotions ran high and pride was involved. She sat across from him, hands folded, heart racing, trying to summon the courage to speak, to apologize without appearing weak, to express love without blame, but each time she opened her mouth, the words faltered, caught between desire and fear, and James continued to move through the meal with the same polite distance, his focus elsewhere, leaving Clara with a growing ache of loneliness that was almost physical. After dinner, she attempted once more, gently asking if they could talk, if they could sit together on the couch and share their thoughts, but James simply nodded without enthusiasm and moved to another room, leaving Clara to stare at the empty space he had left behind, a tangible absence that mirrored the emotional space she felt within her own heart. She paced the living room, replaying the evening and the day, trying to understand what had gone wrong, wishing she could undo the moment at the restaurant, wishing she could hold him close and have the tension evaporate, but the silence and distance told her that reconciliation would not come easily, that patience and persistence were required, that love sometimes demanded endurance when words had created wounds neither of them had intended. Hours passed, and Clara found herself sitting alone by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the dark, feeling the heaviness of uncertainty settle over her, questioning whether the man she loved, who had always been her safe place, could be reached again, and if the wall of hurt and pride that had risen so quickly could be softened by honesty, vulnerability, and time. She remembered small moments of their relationship, holding hands on rainy days, whispering dreams of future adventures, laughing uncontrollably at inside jokes, and each memory stung with a bittersweet ache as she contrasted it with the present. A relationship suddenly fraught with quiet tension, unspoken hurt, and invisible distance that made her chest tighten and her eyes sting with unshed tears. Clara realized that the challenge of love was not just the joy and laughter but navigating moments of miscommunication, moments when emotions ran high and intentions were misunderstood. And she felt the weight of responsibility for both her words and his feelings, a dual burden that made the night feel endless and her heart fragile. She thought about their future, about the conversations they would need to have, about the patience required to rebuild trust and closeness, and though exhaustion threatened to pull her into restless sleep, her mind raced with strategies, with apologies, with hopes that the man she loved would see her intentions, would hear her heart, and would remember the foundation of love, laughter, and shared dreams that had always defined them. By midnight, Clara finally sank onto the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the quiet darkness of the apartment, heart heavy, mind racing, feeling the ache of emotional distance like a physical weight pressing against her chest, knowing that the days ahead would require courage, empathy, and honesty if they were to bridge the silence and restore the warmth that had been present only a day ago, and as sleep threatened to take her, she whispered into the darkness a silent plea, for understanding, for connection, for love to survive the fragile moments that tested it most, hoping that James would find his way back to her heart, as she would to his, in the delicate dance of reconciliation, patience, and unwavering care. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, and Clara felt herself sinking deeper into a whirlpool of anxiety, longing, and regret as James remained distant, polite but cold, moving through their shared apartment like a shadow of the man she had once known. A man whose warmth, laughter, and presence had always been her safe harbor, and the more she tried to reach him, the more the walls seemed to rise between them, solid and unyielding, as if her words from the dinner party had carved an invisible canyon that neither apology nor explanation could immediately bridge. Leaving her heart aching and restless nights stretching endlessly ahead, she replayed every moment in her mind. The way her voice had trembled, the way her plea for support had come out louder than she intended, the flash of hurt in his eyes when she spoke, and every detail compounded her guilt, a constant reminder that love, fragile and beautiful, could be so easily shaken by one unguarded moment, and she wondered if she had misjudged his sensitivity, underestimated his pride, or simply exposed a vulnerability neither of them had been ready to face. Clara tried to fill the silence with small acts of care, leaving notes with gentle words, preparing meals she hoped he would enjoy, sending thoughtful texts, and even attempting to recreate little moments of their early relationship, hoping to remind him of their connection, but James's reactions were minimal, sometimes a nod, a quiet thanks, a polite smile, and yet nothing that bridged the growing chasm between them. The distance became a tangible presence, like a cold wind that swept through the rooms they once shared comfortably, leaving Clara constantly aware of the space between them, her chest tightening with every glance at his quiet figure, every time he avoided eye contact or retreated into his own thoughts. Her mind raced constantly, imagining what he might be feeling, replaying conversations in her head, wondering if he was angry, hurt, or simply lost in disappointment, and the uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her restless and often on the verge of tears as she questioned not only the stability of their relationship but her own ability to communicate love without causing pain, to express need without inadvertently wounding someone she cherished so deeply. At work, Clara found it impossible to focus, her thoughts drifting constantly to James, to the silent tension at home, to the words that had triggered this emotional storm, and even the smallest reminder, a shared memory, a song, the scent of his cologne, would make her heart race and her stomach knot with both longing and dread. She wondered if he was thinking of her, if he missed her warmth, her laughter, the comfort of her presence, or if he had already begun retreating emotionally into a place she couldn't reach. Each evening, she returned home hoping for progress, for a sign that he would open up, that he would break the ice with words of reassurance, that he would bridge the gap with a touch, a smile, a glance, yet every evening seemed to mirror the previous one, polite distance, quiet avoidance, an unspoken tension that seemed to grow thicker as time passed, and Clara felt trapped in a limbo where love existed but connection felt impossible, where intimacy was replaced with polite gestures and unspoken worries, leaving her yearning for the closeness they had once shared. Conversations she tried to initiate were met with short responses, questions answered minimally, her attempts at humor falling flat, and Clara began to notice how even subtle gestures, like brushing against his arm or sharing a laugh, were met with hesitation, a careful withdrawal, as if James feared vulnerability as much as she feared his absence. The realization hit her like a cold wave that their relationship, built on trust and affection, now required not only patience but a profound understanding of each other's unspoken emotions, of the pride and sensitivity that could turn love into tension in a heartbeat. She found herself wandering around the apartment in quiet moments, touching objects that reminded her of better times, photos of vacations, tickets to concerts, little mementos that had once symbolized joy and togetherness, and each memory brought a sharp pang of longing, a reminder of the intimacy that now felt just out of reach, a treasure she had taken for granted until the fragile balance was disturbed by a single, well-meaning but poorly timed remark. Clara's friends noticed her distraction, subtle changes in her mood, the way she would sometimes stare blankly during conversations or answer slowly, lost in thought, and although they offered advice, comfort, and listening ears, she knew that this was a problem only she and James could resolve, that the bridge back to connection could not be built by outside voices but only through honesty, courage, and emotional vulnerability. She tried imagining the conversation she wished she could have with him, rehearsing words, choosing tones, practicing patience, and every scenario ended with her either breaking down in frustration or feeling utterly powerless, the emotional storm inside her growing with each passing day as James remained a quiet, distant presence, polite but emotionally unavailable, leaving her in a constant state of yearning. She began to understand that his pride, his sense of being judged or embarrassed, was as real as her desire for connection, that love was not simply about affection or shared experiences but about navigating the delicate balance of emotion, ego, and vulnerability, and that the path to reconciliation required more than apologies. It required deep listening, empathy, and courage from both of them, a willingness to be seen fully, flaws and all. Clara remembered times when James had been her anchor, when his words, touch, and presence had calmed storms within her, and the contrast with now, the cold distance, the polite avoidance, was almost unbearable, making her long for even a small sign that he still cared, that the foundation they had built together was intact, and that love could survive a moment of misunderstanding. Each night, as she lay in bed, she imagined conversations she might have with him, scenarios where he would finally open up, where their walls would crumble under shared vulnerability, and yet the fear of pushing him further away held her back from reaching out too forcefully, leaving her in a liminal space of hope, anxiety, and heartache, a place where time seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with unanswered questions and unspoken words. Her attempts to engage in other activities, reading, walking, cooking, felt hollow, as every moment was overshadowed by the silent tension at home, by the absence of warmth she had once taken for granted, and she realized that love was not simply the enjoyment of shared experiences but the maintenance of emotional closeness, the careful nurturing of trust, and the courage to be vulnerable, even when it scared her. Clara's thoughts often drifted to the future, imagining how long this distance might last, whether one evening of perceived criticism could create a permanent rift, and what steps she might need to take to rebuild intimacy, trust, and understanding. And in those moments of reflection, the ache in her chest reminded her that love required more than intention. It required consistent care, emotional intelligence, and patience that tested the heart in unexpected ways. Despite her frustration and despair, Clara never stopped hoping, never stopped imagining that they could find their way back to each other, that the man she loved, who had always been her safe place, could once again be her partner in both joy and struggle, that the walls of pride, embarrassment, and silence could crumble under honesty, shared emotion, and empathy, and that together they could navigate the delicate dance of reconciliation, learning to balance sensitivity, communication, and love in a way that strengthened rather than weakened their bond. She spent nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about the dinner, about the distance that had grown, about the fragile nature of love, about pride and hurt, and the delicate art of saying what mattered without causing pain. And she realized that the coming days would not be easy, that patience, courage, and persistence were required if she wanted to heal the rift and remind James, and herself, of the deep, unspoken love that still lingered in the spaces between them, waiting to be rekindled. By the end of the week, Clara felt emotionally exhausted but resolute, understanding that love was worth fighting for, that moments of distance and misunderstanding were not necessarily the end, and that if she could remain patient, compassionate, and honest, there might be a way to reach James, to break through his walls, and to remind them both of the warmth, intimacy, and connection that had once defined their relationship, creating a foundation stronger for the trials they had endured and the lessons they had learned about vulnerability, communication, and the enduring power of love. After days of unbearable silence and heavy hearts, Clara knew she could no longer let the distance between her and James define their relationship. The ache in her chest, the restless nights, the quiet despair of seeing the man she loved withdraw into himself had grown too strong, and she realized that if they wanted to heal, she would have to summon all her courage and confront the situation head-on. So she decided to invite him to their favorite park, the place where they had shared countless memories of laughter, whispered dreams, and intimate moments of connection that had once made the world feel small and safe, hoping that stepping into a familiar and comforting space might soften the tension, provide a gentle backdrop for honest conversation, and remind both of them of the love they had always shared. And when James agreed, his voice calm but hesitant, she felt a flicker of hope mixed with anxiety, knowing that this meeting could either begin to mend the rift or widen it further. As they walked side by side along the winding paths lined with autumn leaves, the crisp air filling their lungs and the soft rustle of trees creating a quiet cocoon, Clara felt her heart race, palms slightly clammy, mind swirling with words she hoped would convey love without blame, regret without guilt, and vulnerability without fear. And as they found a quiet bench overlooking a small pond, she turned to face him, the golden light reflecting in his eyes, and took a deep, steadying breath before speaking. "James, I need to tell you something. I didn't mean to hurt you at the dinner, I didn't mean to embarrass you, and I never wanted you to feel small or unappreciated. I only wanted you to know how much I needed you, how much I love you, and how much it hurts to feel distance between us." She spoke slowly, deliberately, watching his eyes for any sign of understanding, noticing the tightness in his jaw begin to ease, the lines of tension softening as he absorbed her words, and for the first time in days, he looked directly at her, his gaze meeting hers with a raw honesty that made her heart flutter and ache all at once, and she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "I love you, James. I know I made a mistake, but my feelings for you are real, deep, and unwavering. I want us to get back to the place where we feel close, where we feel safe, where we can laugh together again without fear or hurt." James remained quiet for a moment, staring at the pond as if searching for answers, then finally, his voice low and steady, breaking the long silence, I just didn't know how to react. I felt hurt, embarrassed, like I wasn't enough, and I didn't know how to tell you without making it worse, without making you feel guilty. I love you too, Clara, more than I can ever put into words, and the truth is, these days of distance, they've made me realize how much I need you, how much I miss being close to you, how much I hate the silence between us. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, a mix of relief, joy, and lingering sorrow washing over her as she reached for his hand, gently intertwining her fingers with his, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the tension between them began to melt, replaced by the warmth of connection, the simple, profound relief of being understood and loved despite mistakes, despite misunderstandings, despite pride and fear. They sat there for what felt like hours, speaking softly, sharing the thoughts and emotions they had bottled up, apologizing without shame, expressing love without hesitation, and slowly, the walls that had formed over days of silence began to crumble, brick by brick, replaced with tenderness, laughter, and a sense of intimacy that had been missing, a delicate but powerful reminder that love was not about never being hurt or never making mistakes but about patience, understanding, and the courage to confront difficult emotions together. Clara told James about her fears, how every unanswered message, every clipped response had made her feel invisible and unloved, and James shared his perspective, explaining how he had interpreted her words as criticism, how pride had made him retreat, and how much he had missed her presence, her warmth, her laughter, and as they spoke, the autumn sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over them, illuminating not just the park but the emotional clarity and honesty that was beginning to restore their connection. Laughter returned in small doses, tentative at first, as James teased her lightly about her habit of overthinking, and she responded with a playful smile, feeling the weight lift from her chest, realizing that the man she loved had not changed, that the love they shared was still there, resilient, waiting to be nurtured and strengthened by honesty, patience, and care, and that their bond could survive even moments of miscommunication and hurt. They walked slowly along the paths, hand in hand, occasionally pausing to watch the ducks in the pond or to admire the fiery colors of the leaves, feeling the simple joy of being together, the comfort of physical closeness, and the relief of shared understanding. And Clara marveled at how quickly tension could turn to warmth, how quickly walls could be dismantled when hearts were willing to be open and vulnerable. James confessed small fears he had harbored, insecurities about not being enough, and Clara reassured him gently, reminding him that love was not about perfection but about partnership, about weathering storms together, about valuing the bond they had built over time, and with every word, the distance between them shrank, replaced by a sense of mutual appreciation and emotional intimacy that felt both new and familiar. As twilight settled over the park, Clara rested her head on James's shoulder, feeling his warmth, his heartbeat steady against her own, and in that quiet moment, the enormity of what had passed, the tension, the misunderstanding, the days of emotional distance seemed smaller, manageable, conquerable through love, patience, and communication. A lesson learned and a connection deepened. And she realized that sometimes the greatest strength in a relationship came not from avoiding mistakes but from facing them together with courage and compassion. They spoke softly about their future, about how they would handle moments of miscommunication, about prioritizing honesty, about expressing needs without blame, and each plan, each promise, felt like a thread weaving them closer, repairing the fabric of their relationship with care and intention, creating a renewed sense of partnership, intimacy, and trust. As night fell, they left the park slowly, walking side by side under streetlights, fingers still intertwined, hearts lighter than they had been for days, a newfound understanding guiding their steps, and Clara felt a profound gratitude for the experience, the tension, the fear, the heartache, because it had forced them to confront vulnerabilities, to speak openly, to reaffirm love, and to emerge stronger, more connected, more aware of each other's hearts and the delicate balance required to nurture a lasting bond. By the time they reached home, the apartment felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because the emotional weight had lifted, replaced with warmth, laughter, and a quiet, resilient love that promised patience, understanding, and shared joy in the days to come. And as they settled on the couch together, wrapped in a blanket, the silence now comforting rather than heavy, Clara whispered softly, "I love you," and James responded with a smile, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, "I love you too," and in that simple exchange, all the tension, all the fear, all the distance melted away, leaving only the certainty of connection, the beauty of reconciliation, and the powerful reminder that love, when nurtured with honesty, patience, and courage, could survive misunderstandings, pride, and moments of hurt, emerging deeper, stronger, and more resilient than ever before.